Welcome to today's webinar, Strengthening Black Entrepreneurship, Learn and Grow Peer Learning Series. Today's topic, data management. We're going to give folks a minute or two to join, as we know some people are coming from their last meetings and just joining us. We're so excited to have you here with us today and are grateful to be a part of your day. Hello again, and welcome to today's webinar, Strengthening Black Entrepreneurship, Learn and Grow Peer Learning Series. Today's topic is data management. Thank you again for joining us today, and we're so grateful to be a part of your day. Some general housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be mailed to registrants and available online within 1 week. All webinar attendees are muted to ensure sound quality. Ask a question or share your thoughts anytime by typing in the text box of your GoToWebinar control panel. If you experience any technical issues, please email gotomeeting@prosperitynow.org. To get the most out of today's call, we invite you to join from a quiet space. Grab a coffee or a snack and settle in. Engage, send us your questions and comments as you listen. Reflect on ways to apply what you learned today to your own work. A reminder, Prosperity Now's mission is to ensure everyone in our country has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. Now, without further ado, I welcome Chantrice Barnes to start us off.
Hi, welcome again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the final webinar session of the Strengthening Black Entrepreneurship, Learn and Grow Peer Learning Series. My name is Chantrice Barnes, and I'm the Senior Program Associate and one of many co-facilitators for today's session. As mentioned, today's topic will cover data management. And Lauda, can you go to the next slide, please? And also show the PowerPoint. Okay, so for data management, the CDFIs that we worked closely with for this project envisioned a synergetic data ecosystem in which funders and BIPOC-led and serving CDFIs and entrepreneurs of color can share high impact quality data with ease. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, we've already gone over our housekeeping for the day. Thank you, Lauda. Next, we'll move into discussing the state of racial economic equity and CDFIs of color with Ebony White, Senior Director of the Programs team here at Prosperity Now. Then we'll unpack some of the challenges around data management with Brian from AMPAC and Aaron from Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, two leaders working with BIPOC-serving CDFIs. And from there, we'll move into a panel discussion following some audience Q&A. Finally, we'll close out this session with the next steps and how to stay engaged. With that said, I would like to introduce our Senior Director of Programs, Ebony White. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Chantrice. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. As Chantrice mentioned, I'm the Senior Program Director over the Program Unit at Prosperity Now, and I'm excited to be with you all today and to also bring to you all our third video of this webinar series. So if you have been with us for the other two, thank you for being part of this peer-to-peer learning journey with us, and I hope that it has been very informational to you, just like today's will with our awesome panelists that we have planned for you today. I just want to say just real quick for those of you who may not be that knowledgeable about PN, the work that we do is really situated around how can we contribute to an economy and create an economy that is just, fair, and free from structural racism, one where we are really working with our community partners on the ground to drive economic opportunity for all and to build an equitable economic society where people have the power to be able to move through their financial capability as they want to have access to the things that they need to be successful. We are also working with partners on the ground to really center those who have been historically excluded. We work to amplify some community real solutions that really are driven from the community. One of the things that I like to say is that it's not only just the disinvestment that's happening in communities of color, but it's also the disinvestment that is happening in the institutions that are in close proximity to them, that are really providing service to them. And for us, that is the Black and Brown led nonprofits that are really doing a lot on behalf of communities of color and low to moderate income communities everywhere. And so with that, we are having the discussion around CDFIs of color specifically, and also wanting to also think about what does this mean for CDFIs who are also providing services to entrepreneurs of color. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. So today, with our session objectives, what we're looking to do is to help you to gain some insight in how data can inform and advance operational, financial, and human capital, and to learn some best practices for data collection, management, and reporting. We also want to amplify some of the current realities that CDFIs are dealing with when it comes to data collection and management, and engage in some discussions about the future of data management systems, including the role of emerging technologies like blockchain. And we also want to just, in that note, also just lift up some of the best practices that some of our panelists have been able to really have some success in. And lastly, we want to explore the investments needed to build the infrastructures of a data-driven culture, including capacity building, technology adoption, and partnerships with other organizations. Next slide, please. So today, today for our Learn and Grow series, as I mentioned earlier, this is our third installment of our webinar series. The first one was around financial management, then we have technical assistance. Today is data management. And so within that, not only are we gonna lift up some solutions, but we really wanna help to bring voice to some of the challenges, specifically for small to mid-size CDFIs that are providing services to communities of color, and also lift up those best practices again. One of the things that we try to do is to definitely not only lift up our CDFI partners as experts and leaders in the space, but also as innovators, understanding that they are doing a lot more than what traditional banks typically do, and really doing it in some cases with less resources. And how can we really contribute and help them to be able to scale the good work that they are doing? Next slide. So as we're thinking about data management in particular, and what are some of the challenges that the CDFIs are really dealing with, a few of them that you will hear throughout today is that not only is there difficulties with data collection and management, but there's also some with the data reporting, especially speaking to all of the different types of funders, for example, that CDFIs may have, where they may have different needs and wants when it comes to data management. And so how can we consider some of the circumstances of some of the smaller to mid-sized CDFIs' ability to be able to really collect this data in a way where it's really effective and streamlined. It also speaks to some of the low capital and being able to invest in software, capital to invest in staffing capacity to do this work, and also being able to set our CDFIs up to be able to really have data that is disaggregated by race and representing their constituents. And so as we're moving in our society of really trying to be more inclusive and really be more grounded in equity, having data that's disaggregated by race, gender, and all those things is really important to really speak to who your true target area is and how effective you are being, and really being able to isolate where there's some gaps in your work. And then also, duplicate efforts and just difficulties in the data maintenance. And so those are high level, some of the things that you will hear today, and you will also hear probably some more things and examples of how this really comes to life in the reality for our CDFIs. And so with that, I am going to pass it over to two of our partners in this work. As I mentioned before, we have some CDFIs that we've been partnered with on the CDFI playbook that really is the playbook to the discussions that we're having today. But I'm going to ask Aaron and Brian to please come on and to lead us into this great discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ebony.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Such a pleasure to be here. So excited for this conversation. It's truly needed and exciting, to say the very least. But thank you all so much for being here. My name is Brian Kennedy. I'm the Entrepreneur Ecosystem Director with AMPAC Business Capital.
And I'm Aaron Kurland. I'm the Director of Business Services at Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, based in Jamaica, Queens, New York City. Next slide, please. So Brian and I were both part of a collective of CDFIs that came together to discuss the challenges and limitations and barriers in this area. Data collection is sort of on the new side, I guess, for CDFIs. There have been a lot of CDFIs working for decades in the field, but heavy data collection just started recently. Before, CDFIs were asked, how many loans did you make? How many jobs did you help create? Are you doing better or worse this year over last year? The questions were sort of more simple, more streamlined. Everybody was collecting very similar data. Data collection has sort of grown in its importance in part of our mission. Now we're asking a tremendous amount of demographic questions, geographic questions, income questions, things that historically were not really part of the conversation. So data collection at this point has become an integral part of what a CDFI does day to day, but it's also a challenge because we don't actually have a lot of historical data to go along with comparing some of the current data. But so collecting this data is a challenge because obviously it takes manpower. CDFIs are more high touch, which means they're dealing more over the phone or in person with businesses. It's not a fully digital environment. So they're not collecting this data just sort of by mass digital means, which is how often a lot of institutions will collect a lot of data today. So it requires a lot of staff time, and it requires a dedication to making sure that this level of data, which you'll see from the work of Brian and I will talk a little further, is maintained and updated on an ongoing basis. And that leads us into data maintenance. So it's not a one-shot deal. Data has to be maintained. It has to be kept not only up to date, but also as new things happen, we have to now add those data fields and maintain those data fields. And that is a dedication on our part as CDFIs of staff. Without the maintenance of this data, without the ongoing attention to the data becomes stale, becomes irrelevant. And we have to, so it's a commitment on our part, and that's part of the challenge of maintaining this data set. That includes, by the way, starting at the very beginning, which is sort of how are we going to pay for all this, and what kind of processes do we put in place to collect this data? The old way was with Excel spreadsheets, and probably a lot of CDFIs are familiar sorting your data on your borrowers and those, but we're moving more and more into these custom relationship management softwares. There's no sort of magic bullet as far as this is the best one to use, or everybody's using this and it's very standardized. It's disaggregated. There is no standard on how best to do it. Organization like ours, just to, I guess, sort of put it out there, we use a few pieces of software, but the main one is Salesforce.com, it also obviously costs money to do. But after you make those, and after the challenges of collecting the data and maintaining the data, we have the issue of data reporting. And I think the collective was very forward about this reporting part of it. As a collective, a lot of the CDFIs said that the different funders are really asking for very different types of data, reporting. So while funder A may want these type of 6 variables, funder B may want that plus another 5, and funder C may want none of those, but these other 5 data points. So it gets really challenging for, as the collective has said, to sort of be able to meet the data reporting needs of really the wide variety of funders and the sort of the non-static or the non, I guess, uniformed way that the data is being asked to be reported. So those are the challenges around data, I think, on a macro level. And then we have limitations. So digital divide, that's real. Communities that we serve, the level of comfort with technology is varied. It's not standard, and that trickles up into the staff as well. The staff now is required to do more, because if the client is not able to interact with you in a fully digital way, the staff can't then have its data and data software being fed in a fully digital way either, which requires staff time. The cost, all of these different systems are really expensive. They're really expensive, and it's not a one-time cost. It's not as if we could make this investment or raise the funds and just sort of make that one-time injection of capital into some piece of software. Software now is an ongoing expense. It is something that you're going to have perhaps a bigger line item this year when you start, but it may be 2/3 as big as that, even on a year-to-year basis. So you can't exactly set it and forget it. It's a cost, and it's an ongoing cost, and it's a challenge that a lot of CDFIs face when it comes to the need to collect and report on data. Scale is another issue. The ability to really bring this data as a large data set, and to really maintain that large data set, and to sort of bring your small organization or medium-sized organization up to the same quality of data that a big bank or someone may ask for is a scale issue, and getting to that scale is a challenge for CDFIs. And I think the collective as a whole, there was I would say an understanding that we're collecting all this data points, and we know that a lot of this data is relevant, but some of it actually, depending upon the CDFI you're at, some of them felt that it weren't as relevant, and they were collecting a lot of data that although one of their 12 funders may have wanted, it was only one. And it was a big lift from a data standpoint, and making sure that what we're doing is relevant, making sure that the funders understood that all of these CDFIs were being asked to do was on point for the mission of that CDFI and that funder, and keeping things relevant when it comes to data is also one of the limitations that a lot of the CDFIs face. So if you could just, next slide, please. So here at Greater Jamaica, we try to take a look at our data. We have a few services. Obviously, we do lending and do technical assistance. Look at our technical assistance. So the big question is how many kinds of technical assistance you do. And when you get into there, but it's not just a handful of technical assistance. When it goes, in this case, it was 1,800 TA cases. You track it somewhere, and you got to be able to tell that story. So we're fortunate enough to be able to really utilize the data, the system we have, at least to the fullest, and we're able to sort of break data. And what you can see here is we're very close on Black-owned businesses that we serve. So you could 47% of all the TA in the last years went to Black-owned businesses, and then we were able to break it further. We were able to break it down into Black-owned businesses, which is 28%, and Black male-owned businesses, which is 19%. And then all the other demographics in our category sort of were about equal as far as our TA went. Next slide, please. So then we even spent time to go further. We we're based here in like I said, New York City, but really we focus on one community, which is the southeast part of Queens County, and we wanted to see where our technical assistances were happening, or were we hitting the communities that we wanted to hit. And this is a chart that we made that really showed the concentration of activity and where our service resources were being used most. By our Black-owned businesses, and we were able to show that we were in the community that we wanted to serve. We were making the impact we wanted to make in those communities. Next slide, please. So another way we handle our data, this is on our lending, is making sure that we're hitting our targets. Again, we have two main targets at our CDFI, and that is to lend to Black-owned businesses and to lend to woman-owned businesses. And this chart demonstrates for the last 6 years, although 2023 is not a full year obviously yet, but the percentage of our lending that went to Black-owned businesses. And on average, we're sort of at that 50% mark, which is where we want to be when it comes to lending, to make sure that at least half of our lending on average over time goes to Black-owned businesses. And the same is true for woman-owned businesses. We're also sort of in that range, and we're able to track that. And it's those data management systems that we put into place that help us do this. But those data management systems sort of face the same challenges we spoke about, which is this is a very large capital investment on our part and a very large time commitment on our part. And it's something that as you grow as a CDFI, I think a lot of folks want to get to this point. It took us a lot of time to get there, and probably some folks do it even better than us, but we use these metrics to help us keep ourselves in line and help us go forward. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to take it on to the next step. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. So once again, Brian Kennedy with Impact Business Capital. I definitely echo all the sentiments that Aaron has made along all sides. And just to give a gauge of how we break down our technical assistance data and our loan management data, we break it down based on our community platform. So we did do our technical assistance in a more digital way that includes a personal touch, but and these numbers are changing daily, and which is a capital expenditure and a time resource expenditure. But we are currently growing our ecosystem to serve across the spectrum of race and ethnicity and gender. We do target BIPOC and women-owned businesses, and you can see that reflected in the ecosystem users that we currently do administer technical assistance services to. And the goal of this model is to just continue to create the continuum of support to finance and foster business success from cradle to legacy. But it is intensive. And as you see, we try to serve very intentionally within our demographic target markets. But by the numbers, you can see our data is pretty cut and dry, it's pretty clear. And with that, we can move on to the next slide where I'll get to our loan data. And so from the impact side, we have different lending arms. We have two different lending arms. We have our community lending arm, and then we have our 504, SBA 504 lending arm. From our CDFI arm, however, this is our community lending investment impact breakdown. And so we have administered in 2022 over 3.5 million in capital, and you can see our demographic breakdown. Once again, we focus on BIPOC and women-owned businesses, but we do serve business owners across the spectrum. And so we're really intentional about tracking our data points like our jobs created, and what percentage of our capital is being administered to low to moderate income areas. And so this type of data tracking is exciting, but it does take time. But you see the value, right? You can see the impact that we have in our community. You can see the impact that we have in serving the business owners that we want to serve. Over the course of our history, you see some of our statistics on the left-hand side as well. But once again, this all goes to the continuum of support for financing and fostering business success, with the technical assistance being more of the fostering of that business success, but the capital administration being that financing of business success. But with that, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so at this time, we are going to invite our panel to the screen to come on camera. We have Thelma Johnson with Albany Community Together. We have James Walls with Mission Investors Exchange. We have Asusana Favela with the James Irvine Foundation. And we have Christopher Earl with the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. Thank you so much for joining us. So excited to enjoy this discussion today. With that, we can move on to the next slide. So we're going to jump in with a little bit of an introduction. So we're going to let each panelist introduce themselves so that I do not mess it up and you can get the full breadth of all of their expertise and all of their passion from their introduction. But we'll go left to right. If we can go in the same order as we see on the slide, we'll start with you, Thelma.
Thank you, Brian. I am Thelma Johnson, President and CEO of Albany Community Together. We're located in South Georgia. We're 3 hours away from Atlanta, so there is another Georgia outside of Atlanta. And we service small businesses. We have a small business revolving loan fund, and we are an MSA surrounded by a large rural community, and I'm happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Walls. I'm the Senior Vice President of Programs and Initiatives at Mission Investors Exchange, MIE for short. We are the membership organization for 250 plus philanthropic asset owners and their partners and advisors. I look forward to this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join today's discussion. I'm Asusana Favela, a Senior Program Officer with the James Irvine Foundation. We are a California-based foundation with grant making across the state. Our North Star is to create a California where all low-wage workers have the opportunity to advance economically, and we do this via multiple initiatives that support advocacy, worker organizing, workforce development, and narrative change work. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Earl. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. We're a division within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development here in California. And I'm happy to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. Look forward to speaking with you all shortly. We have 4 missional objectives in the office, and that's providing information and resources to small businesses, providing advocacy and support through bill and legislation, as well as disaster and resilience for small businesses. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you all so much for those phenomenal introductions. I told you all they're going to make sure to give you the introduction that gives true justice to who they are and what they do. So once again, thank you all so much for being a part of this panel. We're really excited for this discussion. And with that, we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to jump right in. So this first question is going to be directed toward Chris and James. What is expected of CDFIs for data requests from different types of funders? You can share what some of the differences in data reporting between CDFIs and traditional banks look like from your perspective. That would be really appreciated.
I'm happy to start, and then I'll pass it over to Chris. So from my vantage point, I really work with foundations, and previously I did impact investing at 2 foundations, the NEKC Foundation and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. So much of what I'm going to share is coming from the foundation perspective. And I would say, you know, in terms of data requests from funders and investors or impact investors, there are really, I would say, 4 categories in terms of the data requests. So the financial, so that's the financial health of the organization. So that's oftentimes that's going to come into like your audited financials, your quarterly financials. They're going to be looking for core things around net assets, total assets, you know, restricted assets, liabilities, your who else was providing capital, co-investors, et cetera. So really, I would say all those metrics are around like kind of the financial health of the organization at large. Then it's the organizational data points. So oftentimes that is staffing, who's there, the demographic information of the staff and the board, especially if you're a nonprofit CDFI. Then impact. So those are the stats and metrics, both quantitative and qualitative data points about what you're doing, how you're executing your mission, and making sure that you're achieving your mission. And then the funder-specific things. And I think we heard a little bit about some of the frustrations that could come about from the funder-specific things. Oftentimes, those metrics or those data requests are related to internal conversations, which we will get to later, or they're really trying to validate the mission. And oftentimes for the program officer, the impact investment officer, to showcase why they should continue funding certain strategies. And so those, I would say that category is oftentimes can feel miscellaneous, but there's always some attention oftentimes on the back end of why those funder-specific metrics are being asked. With that, I'll pass over to Chris.
All right, thank you for that, James. And yeah, I think James brought up a lot of key areas that us within government, we also look to identify, particularly with CDFIs, but also with other partners that we work with or grantees, if you want to use terminology that's consistent, because we give out a lot of this funding through granting and things of that nature. So we're looking at past performance as a key area. Being a former practitioner myself, I'm kind of hard line about those things. So I expect your back office and your paperwork and the accounting to be easy for my team to be able to identify what's going on. And so all of the things that James alluded to earlier in terms of the audits, a lot of those things are synonymous for us as well. We want to see the past performance, the history, and the administrative capacity to do the work that we're asking. And we understand that we can be a difficult partner at times in terms of how the government works and timelines and things of that nature. So we need organizations that kind of are ready for that. And so for us, it's not to say if you can't today that you won't be able to in the future. We have a lot of organizations that we've kind of worked through and did some hand holding to get them up to code, but it is, you know, and so that's like the administrative piece. I don't want to go too far into that, but then we also have the actual programmatic piece in terms of who are you actually working to serving in terms of like the program specific asks. And so I won't get too deep into that, but obviously we're going to look at who are you serving, communities, demography. The challenges that we have is that as a state, because of certain propositions and things of that nature, it's very delicate in terms of how the state collects data from small businesses particularly. And so a lot of it's come through self-attestations. And so depending on how that mechanism or however that model is, it could be some accuracy to it, and then there could be some wide-ranging margins in terms of what that data is telling you. And so obviously in the state, we're not on the top end in terms of technology, tools, and things of that nature. So I would imagine for us, it's a little bit more challenging for us to get proper data when it comes to the who in terms of who we're serving if we're not providing like direct contracts and things. So for us, we want partners that can make it really easy for us in understanding our needs as well. But I think the big thing is like who you're serving and do you have the capacity to take on these funds? And then obviously there's situations where, hey, we have some extra money. Do you have extra capacity to do this? And, you know, it just keeps going on and on. So we want to see that sustainability. A partner that we can work with for multiple years. We don't want one-shot partners, I guess is the best way to put it. We want those that we can grow, even if you're small. Now we've got partnerships as small as $20,000, but it's as high as into the millions. So it's about who you're serving and your effectiveness, and if you're doing the right work for your community. So I'll stop there, but that's a good one, Brian. Thank you.
Awesome. No, those are both great responses. Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much, Chris. Talk about a great start. So we'll jump into the second question. And this question, we're gonna bring you back in, Chris, and we're also gonna address this question to you as well, Asusena. What support can funders provide to BIPOC-led and serving CDFIs to positively shift data collection, management, and reporting? I'm gonna ask that question one more time, and then I'll let you both jump in. What support can funders provide to BIPOC-led and serving CDFIs to positively shift data collection, management, and reporting? Chris, we can start with you, and then we'll go to Asusena.
All right, this is a good one. This is kind of segues from my last response because of our difficulties with the data collection, and that's directly asking. We have a site called Cali Procure, where if you want to get federal contracts with this, or sorry, not federal, state contracts with us, then you have to go through this site, and it's self-attestation on that site, but it's, you know, it's a little challenging in terms of the margins, as I mentioned. So when we have partners that are working in the communities that we're trying to administer programs and collect information, they don't have the same challenges that we do, right? So through those partners, we're able to get more granular data, more effective information that really tells the story. So through our contracts or through our granting, more so through the granting side of it, we're able to collect the data that we need. And so those organizations that do that work for us through our technical assistance networks and things of that nature, they have rules and conflicts of interest and things of that nature. So that information isn't something that they could share out with the public per se, but they have a better, they get a better look. You know, like you, Ampac, like you guys, it's the same thing. You're in the same region with me. You guys have a better look at who you're serving, what their needs are, and things of that nature. You can ask the questions or collect the data that we may be restricted by through policy and things of that nature. So we leverage that ability. We need you all in those communities knowing what's happening so that you can better inform us. We don't have the boots on the ground, so it's a partnership in that way. And so it's my job to identify, or the team's job to identify who's doing the right work in these right communities and how can we shift those resources to make sure they're making it to the right community. So that's you know, thank you for that, because that's a big one. So for us, if we have a need, particularly right now, procurement and AB 2019 is a big state thing, a 25% mandate on small business procurement, which is huge within the state of California. It's codified in law now. What is that going to mean for us as state agencies and procuring our dollars out to the small business community? So for these organizations that we're working with, a lot of our contractors need money. They need bridge capital. They need these small sums of money to help them finish and complete a project. So for us, we will understand who are those folks. We want to understand how we can better serve them. How can we connect those dots with the capital that we have, like SSBCI? We've got $1 billion in federal money that's available. And so how can we draw those linkages? And that's where you all come in. That's where you all can provide those solutions, give us creative ways to better serve those communities. So we don't want to prescribe, we want to listen, do a lot of listening, and then provide solutions to that. So yeah, thank you for the alley-oop there, Brian. That was great.
Thank you, Chris. That was awesome. Azucena?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Chris. There's one word you said, Chris, that I want to pick up on, and that's the listening part. I think for us as a private foundation, we are revisiting both our application and reporting requirements. And we're doing this with the guidance of our grantees. And so we'll work with our grantees to gather feedback on really how to make our process easier, because we want to make sure that once we get dollars out the door, that the organizations are putting them to the highest and best use and that they know best. And so how they report back to us is something we definitely want to make easier. Now, some of the areas that I'd be interested in supporting is really this shared understanding of how the data is being used. If I put on my hat as a CDFI or nonprofit, you know, we'd oftentimes receive a report template, we'd grunt over what was being asked, probably do a few cartwheels to produce the report using Excel, but we never paused to really engage the funder on the intent behind each data piece that was being collected. And so if we understood how the data was being collected, we might be able to recommend different metrics or different stories to tell. And so I think there is an opportunity to rethink and build a different relationship between funder and CDFI to really design a reporting system that tells a holistic story that both meets the funder's needs and that of the CDFI. I also think there's an opportunity to revisit frequency. As I was preparing for this conversation, I informally surveyed a few CDFI colleagues. One shared they have monthly reports for funders. That places such an unnecessary administrative burden on them when they could be providing direct services. Now, another thing that came up in these informal conversations is that when funders are hyper-focused on, let's say, the repayment rate, which came up frequently in these conversations, it creates this unintended consequence of creating stricter programs and terms for borrowers, making it really challenging to reach the BIPOC small businesses that we as funders initially set out to support. And so really the thread here is, how do we listen? How do we co-design? And how do we make it easier for CDFIs to support small businesses? And so that being said, I really recommend just this deep and open conversation with funders to discuss ways in which we can align our funding.
That was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Azucena. All right, this conversation is fun. I told y'all we are going to have a good time today. All right, let's keep rolling. So the third question, we are going to open this question up to the group. Thelma, I am going to ask if you can tackle it first, and then we're going to open it up for everybody to kind of give feedback, perspective sharing. But the question is, what are the possibilities for a streamlined data collection system? And how can we move the needle in that direction? Thelma, I want to pass it to you to start, and then we'll open it up.
Thank you for that question, Brian. I'm going to go back to something that Azucena said about making a challenge to serve the BIPOC community. And that means that we have to address streamlining the data collection and identifying data that those CDFIs that are serving that population can get and not create additional burdens. Because we had one funder to ask us for data on our risk rating of our loans. And that was going to be a consideration for giving us a grant or a equity injection or either a loan. If we're going to look at the risk rating, then we're not going to be in business, because our ecosystem is going to be rated higher. If you have 72% of our loans, 82% of our loans going to people of color, then you have to understand that our risk is going to be higher than one that's serving 60% of that market. And then we're in a rural and urban area that's combined. And so then the lack of business development services that they have access to, and then the lack of documentation that they come to the table with, we are creating those documents for them. But we have to make sure that we're able to provide the data that the funders are asking for us to stay in business. So if we can have those data points streamlined, stay with the ones that are common, the jobs created, the loans that we make, and then we can move to, I heard it said over and over, Data tells the story that CDFIs do. And we have since began to include a story in every report that we do, because that story can be quantified, because we can tell the impact that we've had on that borrower if that borrower is moving into a better quality of life. If we started with the borrower and they were not a homeowner, and since working with them, the business has grown, revenues have increased, they are now a homeowner or have purchased additional capital and equipment to scale and grow their business. So there are some data points that we can look at outside of the traditional data, and data that is not overwhelming and overbearing for a BIPOC-led organization to acquire. And I think we just need to make sure that when we're looking at data, that every system, every ecosystem is not equal. Every system that a CDFI is operating in is not equal. So what may be for California may not be for South Georgia, but we can come to a agreement that we can have data that is shared, and that's the data that all CDFIs should be collecting. Jobs created, the amount of loans that we've done, how much revenues the company has grown. We can look at those things that are similar and common across all ecosystems and kind of come up with a streamlined data collection process.
That is beautiful, Thelma, and 120% agreed. Thank you for that.
I knew you would as a CDFI.
You might know me, okay? You might know what we collect.
I just want to say, as representing the funder side, I agree too, Thelma. Not both sides. We agree on this panel, and just I wanted to like touch upon something that was said earlier, and maybe one of the questions that's in the Q&A. So first of all, I think the number one thing in terms of how we help streamline is to actually request funding for data collection. I know that we're going to talk about that at some point, but I just wanted to just put it out there. Oftentimes when you're talking to foundations, especially foundations, there's a request for the impact investing dollars, or you're asking for capital for funding or operational support, but oftentimes the fund request ends there and doesn't go to evaluation and data as much, or less money is asked, because sometimes there may be a fear working with some funders to ask for that money. But if they are requiring you to fund, you need to ask and be very intentional to say, like, we need a line item for this type of funding for evaluations, for TA support, for other things, especially if you're thinking about instituting a content management system like Salesforce or some other source. Oftentimes those platforms do have technical assistance, but it costs extra money to get that technical assistance from them. And so that also needs to be rolled up in any type of request that you're going to have regarding like TA, or trying to streamline your process. So I'll stop there.
Brian, if I can just jump in on this. So there is one line, and first of all, just big kudos on the CDFI playbook. There was one line that had me lean back and reread, and I'm gonna share it with you all. And that is, for small to medium-sized CDFIs, the time and resources needed to respond to the data request and stay in compliance don't always add up to the level of capital provided. So for me, as we just heard from James, like, this is the core of this data question. How can we as funders either right size our reporting demands from grantees, or provide the funding that's needed to provide the robust reporting that we're looking for?
I know our Prosperity Now team is smiling ear to ear hearing that one, Susan.
Brian, can I make a comment on that too? Because I wrote that down as one of my points when writing a grant, to actually data collection written into the grant agreement as a cost and a capacity building piece, because that does just that. When we are asked to do a report, it takes time and manpower to mine data. And if we don't have the technology and the resources to actually collect it along the way, it creates another barrier and a hurdle for those small CDFIs to be effective in the grant writing. And then if data is one of the things that they're looking at to make a decision, and what type of data we presented and how we're telling our story, then that could mean that the difference between us getting approved or not getting approved. And that's why we decided to put a story in every grant agreement to tell how our funding has impacted the real lives of our borrowers when we make a loan to them.
That's 100% true. Because we definitely will hold that against you if the data isn't there. That will go right into the decision. Smaller organizations won't even make it to my level if they don't make it past the first filter of reviewers. So your point's well taken, Thelma. I think that's a big piece. And I think it was you, Brian, that said, oh no, James, you got to ask. I think in all of those, applications, proposals you're putting in, you've got to ask for it. I think that before I was in this work, I wrote a lot of grants, and that's just an automatic. You have to, as someone looking to write back to funders and things. That's your goal. That's going to be able to, you can leverage that, on and on and on your performance. So that data collection is not only for the funders, but it's also for you, and being able for you all to use that as leverage and telling your story too. So, flip it for yourselves also, for those out listening too. But great point, Thelma. Thank you for saying that.
Awesome. Okay. I want to make sure we have enough time to get to any questions from the audience as well. So we're going to keep moving. We have 3 more questions that we'll aim to address here in our panel discussion. So the next question on our docket, Thelma, I am coming your way with this one first, and then we will open it up again. But this hits on the point that you were just making. BIPOC-led and serving CDFIs do often experience challenging with accessing information to engage data collection, especially obtaining in-depth data from the business owners that we as CDFIs serve. Any recommendations or any possible solutions for making this information and this data more accessible to CDFIs?
Well, if I'm understanding the question right, I mean, because we serve businesses that may not be prepared financially, and then the data we get may not be the best data. I think I heard someone say it may have been Chris, that they're self-certifying or self-attesting to the data that they have. So the quality of data may not be there. And it goes back to what was said earlier about asking for the funding and for the resources to get the right systems so that we can manage them through. And what we decided to do, because we have some businesses that we know certain the data that they provided to us was not accurate, but they had a sufficient business. They had a business that was viable. And we decided to take our technical assistance team to actually sit down with this business to make sure that we can fit them and make sure that we can right the ship. We can help them to write their data, to write the information that they're going to give to us, to provide that in-depth TA and business development services so that they can be a better business after having interface with us. And so I think it begins with really looking at the market that you're serving and what is the impact on the organization to do quality loans if we're not going to be doing quality TA.
That's good. And I can definitely just add to that briefly, because that's the point of the continuum. It has to be finance and foster the business success. They have to go hand in hand. They can't be segmented, or you just don't see the same success-based outcome. Absolutely agreed, Thelma. Any other comments on that question before we move on to the next question? Okay. Thank you. 2 more to go. James, I'm going to come your way with this one first, and then we'll open it up. What are the system barriers internally to more consistent and streamlined data requests from funders to CDFIs?
So you're asking for some inside baseball, Brian, it sounds like. All right, so given that I represent these organizations, I guess I'm going to just go in anyway. So a couple of the barriers. Ironically, one of the major barriers for the funders is technology. When you look at their back office, they're actually going through the same challenges as CDFIs. If you look at some of the reporting systems, how they're trying to integrate, You have old systems, new systems, folks who've been there too long, folks who've just got there, and they're all trying to integrate and figure out how to use their systems. They're actually going through many of the same struggles that the CDFIs or their grantees or funders or investees are going through. So that's the system barrier that I think funders, while they don't say anything about it, is really working on that. The other thing is funding priorities. Funding priorities changes at funders all the time. If you've worked at a foundation on this call, then you can relate to this. That every 3 years there's a change in strategy or priority, and therefore your funding pools may fluctuate. They may go up and down, and so that becomes a system barrier. Figuring out like how do you fund for a multi-year. That's why oftentimes you see like these single year funding approaches, is because there are changes in the strategy that are happening constantly. And so therefore, that can also be a system barrier that you're working through. Different grant management systems. So we've kind of talked about this. All the funders, depend upon the size, what their expertise are, their priorities. They use different content management systems. They use investment systems. And if the capital source is a different capital source, for example, if it's coming from grants or if it's a funding that's coming from the endowment, then it's totally different platforms. And so, and those platforms require like different information, different prerequisites, et cetera. And so, navigating that internally is often difficult for those who are looking to provide funding and investment to especially BIPOC focused, center, and led CDFIs. And then lastly, a bias towards scale. And when I mean scale, I'm talking about just pure numbers. Like there's a bias in funders for large numbers, but ironically, there's less of a focus on the in-depth work that's happening. So it may be lesser numbers, but you may be actually providing greater impact with those fewer numbers. But there's often a focus because of the audience that these funders are working with. A funder for larger numbers when they do presentations and justification for their funding budgets for the following year. So I'll pause there. Hopefully that was enough for you, Brian. Just make sure.
Very good, James. Any other feedback before we move on to the next question? Okay, looks like we got some agreements though, James, and those comments definitely resonate. So thank you so much for that insight. It's really appreciated. Okay, we'll move on to the last question of our panel. Susanna, this question is coming your way, and then we'll open it up for further discussion. What do you see as the role of the different kinds of funders in changing their data request processes that would allow CDFIs to better collect and manage data? I'm going to ask the question one more time. I know because it's a little lengthy. What do you see as the role of the different kinds of funders in changing their data request processes that would allow CDFIs to better collect and manage data?
Sure. First, Brian, I do want to acknowledge that as a private foundation, we may have more flexibility compared to, say, banking or corporate funders. And so because we do provide general operating support, we lean on our grantees to tell their story about impact and how the funding is supporting their organization and their clients. We have a greater focus on qualitative data that tells a more holistic picture about a region and its needs. We also make larger multi-year grants because we care about the long-term sustainability of grantees, especially to support their role in systems change work. For example, one grantee in the Inland Empire, they used our funding to convene regional partners and develop a tool that facilitates a seamless referral system between service providers. For us, this is success. We weren't necessarily counting how many businesses were served, but rather the way the system changed and improved to better support businesses. Now, I understand the requirements are different for banks and corporations, especially banks, because of their CRA requirements. They're likely asking, as Thelma's already noted, in-depth information about who's being served, race, gender, location, jobs created. Because CRA reporting is a common thread across bank funders, I do see an opportunity to convene them in a design process to streamline reporting. Maybe even getting them to agree that a single report for multiple entities is possible. I would say a best practice for banks that are providing loan capital for CDFIs is to pair the loan with a grant that's going to support this data management need or any other administrative cost, including the technical assistance for small businesses. I want to underscore that it's really ultimately about how we as funders are issuing the funds to grantees. If we can provide a general operating support, that's probably more impactful on the operations and balance sheet of a CDFI. If we can't do general operating support, we should really consider funding the full cost of program implementation. Those 10 to 15% administrative fees are likely not funding your entire vision for the program. And then finally, I just encourage funders to consider larger multi-year support to ensure that CDFIs can adequately plan over the course of multiple years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susanna. Susanna, that was a really phenomenal response. Are there any other comments or feedback points in response to that last question before we conclude our panel?
I was looking for a response button to cheer and clap, but I couldn't find one.
Yes, I love it. I love it. This has been so much better than we even anticipated. Thelma, Asusana, James, Chris, I really can't thank you all enough for your presence, for being available, and for your honesty. I know in these conversations, sometimes it's not easy to be transparent. It's not easy to be honest and open, but I can't thank you all enough for your willingness to engage in that way today. But as we conclude our panel, I'm going to give a round of applause because this has been phenomenal. Thank you all so much again. And at this time, we will conclude our panel. And we are going to invite the audience. We're going to invite people who are participating in our webinar today to ask questions at this time to our panelists. We definitely want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. And this is the opportunity where we will take the time for that. So if you have any questions, pop them in. Let's have some fun. And really, don't shy away from questions that you've been thinking about for a while, or if you think it's something that may be challenging to answer, pop it in. Well, let's enjoy the conversation today. But as you see on the screen, you do have options on how to ask your question, and we'll be able to see it there. But at this time, we will let questions come in, and then we will respond accordingly. Let me see if we have any coming in now. All right, so we do have a couple already in. Awesome. Okay, so the first question: what kind of TA is provided, and what data point do you use to track them? Great first question. So I'd love to kick off some of the answer that, because this is a very, very broad question, because TA is so all-encompassing. It can encapsulate a lot of components of business consulting, business coaching, business mentoring, grant allocation. And so with us here at AMPAC, we really try to bring all of that into a technical assistance experience. To the other side of that, what data point do we use to track it? We track hours. We track how much time we have spent with that business owner to provide them that consulting, to provide them that coaching, to provide them that mentoring, and then any dollars that we've been able to add to their growth journey, whether that be grant awards, whether that be a loan. And so those are some of the data points that we utilize to track technical assistance and some of the type of technical assistance that is provided. And that consulting, coaching, and mentoring is across the board: HR, marketing, accounting, obviously one of the big ones. But I definitely want to open up the floor. Thelma, if you want to share any of the TA and any of the data points you all use to track your TA in response to this question, I'm sure our audience member would be honored.
We do the same. We do hours, but we're beginning to track dollars invested in the TA because we're having to get subject matter experts to help some of our businesses with the development of their accounting systems and customizing the TA to a particular business to make sure that they're able to continue in business since COVID and fully recover. And so we're going to begin tracking the investment that we have made in addition to the dollars that we're loaning and how the business will grow. We're hoping to track the revenues as well. And that is looking at the financial statements, creating an accounting system, and leaving them with accounting financial statements that we all can trust.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we have 2 more questions so far. So we'll jump into question 2. What impact will the proposed changes to the CDFI rules impact BIPOC businesses and CDFIs in general? Are they favorable or unfavorable in your opinion? Please excuse my smile and my joy, but I love this question because it's a very exciting time, but there are 2 sides to that excitement, right? There are pieces of the new CDFI rules that are favorable. There are pieces of the new CDFI rules that aren't as favorable. I can share from the perspective of our CDFI here at AMPAC Business Capital. These rules are definitely going to impact the market as a whole, whether that be opening up the arena for more CDFIs to come in, or whether it be the restrictions that allow some CDFIs to not continue. Both sides is going to have an impact. And I do believe that these rule changes are favorable because they expand access for CDFIs to have greater impact through dollar amount and through capacity. And so we'll be able to have more resources within our tool belt to be able to serve business owners with greater capacity. And that will advance how much more we can do, which is exciting. On the unfavorable side, however, the restrictions are more intensified. So what we're talking about today, data management, reporting, those things are going to continue to develop as well. And so both sides, positive, as well as more learning and more growing, create that equation. But we are also excited on all sides. But Thelma, do you want to share your perspective as well on this one?
I agree with everything that you said so far with the CDFI impact and the new rules, especially around the certification piece, is going to make sure that those that are CDFIs and working in target markets are not just CDFIs in name only, but actually servicing the market that you've agreed to in your mission, and that most of your products and services are going to that particular market. So I find that as very favorable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. All right. We got, oh, nice. We have a new one that came in. Okay. So the third question from the audience, quantitative data only goes so far. How do you think about data outside of numbers that really gets to the story of need and impact? Oh, I love this question. So success stories are like my jam. Like that's my absolute favorite thing in the world. I love seeing our business owners actually get to the point where they can cheer for themselves and we can cheer for them too. And you do that alongside our community. And so quantitative data definitely helps to get to that outcome, but the qualitative data is the story, right? It's what they went through, what systems did they implement, and how can we share that story? By implementing new accounting software, right? As Thelma mentioned, right? Being able to understand and be able to pull reports on their financial statements, how that impacted the effectiveness of the growth of their business and what their business is now doing. That's the qualitative data that we love. That's the storytelling that we love. How many more employees they've gotten to hire. Yes, that's quantitative too, but that's also qualitative because those employees are real people and those employees have families. And we have a phrase that we like to use: when you advance entrepreneurial dreams, you strengthen families and you uplift communities. And so we love telling that story. And so we know that that qualitative data, the data that sometimes coincides with the quantitative data, but is also different from the numbers, it really gets to the story of the impact. And once again, the need. We get to see, okay, the journey that this business owner went on, the needs that they have, so that we can better articulate how we are fulfilling those needs and encourage other business owners to come and work with us so we can fulfill those needs as well. But I definitely want to open up the floor. Does anyone have any perspective on our third question about the story of need and impact?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Brian. I'll look at this from like funder perspective, but also as a former TA practitioner who worked in both regions. One region is very quantitative heavy, and then you had another region that we couldn't get the quantitative numbers up at all. It was just a challenge across the board. And so the thought for me as the funder, when I'm looking at regions that we're looking at funding, there's a certain level of expectation that comes with those regions. So when I look at Orange County, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, those areas, I am going to be on their case about quantitative data. Like they should be, rocking and rolling, hitting the ground running. When I look at performance, right, I should be getting high performance, high quantitative numbers. I should expect to have some qualitative aspects to that. I think there's always a balance, but I lived in the Inland Empire, Riverside, San Bernardino. So those quantitative numbers, while they look great on the coastal side, when I go inland, it's a lot different. Some of the components that are needed that are being leveraged in those coastal areas don't even exist in these inland areas. So then the success looks different for those inland areas. The success is putting together a fund, creating pathways for these entrepreneurs to get access to the resources, because the access is becoming geographic isolation. You think 40, 50 miles from LA is like close, but if you live here, it's not when it comes in terms of access to resources. So how do we, help our region, the communities that we serve? How do we fill those gaps? We don't want brain drain. We don't want entrepreneurs leaving our region to go to other resource-rich areas. It's kind of the thought process from a former practitioner. So we need to identify the gaps that are, troubling all of us as practitioners, and then come up with a way to fill gaps. Go to the state, go to the government to help us fill these gaps. Go to funders, private funders like ASU, as you've seen, to the Irvine Foundation. Ask them to support some of these efforts to fill those gaps. Irvine Foundation, we had a gap in apprenticeship many, many years ago. Irvine Foundation stepped up. I think it was $1 million at the time, stepped up, put it together for a regional program around apprenticeship. So those are the things or the thoughts that I would have. Is like, in some areas, I have to take I don't want to say softer, because that implies like favoritism, but it's more so like I have to have more of sensitivity to the nature of what's happening in those communities before I set, and because I'm a heavy hand, so I want to make sure I'm understanding of what the dynamics are before I go and issue rules and guidelines and parameters. Or I want to be able to tier things off. Like in these areas, I expect this, but over here, you have a different situation. So I want to be able to have that flexibility as a funder. So we rely on the community to make sure that we're in line with what the needs are. So I'll stop there, but thank you. That was a great question.
Great. Okay. We got one more, and it looks like this is our last question from the audience. And this one is directed to our funders. Do either of the funders on this panel offer TA to help us deliver what is requested from funders? I'll open up the floor.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And I would say it's an interesting dance, right? So for our grantees or folks that we're inviting to apply, we as senior program officers, work closely with them as they're developing their proposal. And so we make sure that they feel like their questions are being answered and there's clarity through the process. So there's a lot of handholding if needed and requested for our grantees. As a general sort of technical assistance provider to nonprofits or CDFIs, it is not something that we do. There are special instances, as Chris mentioned, when there's a call and we step in. For example, when the state released its SURF funding, it's a Community Economic Resilience Fund, we understood that there were communities that would need additional support to organize. And so we issued grants and technical assistance to support regions through the SURF process. So it really just depends. But as a blanket, do we offer technical assistance to the CDFI and nonprofit community? We do not at this time.
And where I said it would be the same answer.
I would say right now, currently, we haven't on the state side, but we are working towards that because we've expanded from 34 partners to over 100. So I think that it would be smart of us to start doing a little more hand holding with these partners. It's beyond the point of knowing the director at every center when there's 30 versus now there's 100 across the state. And, you know, you've got to look at the report. And so I think I'm proposing some type of professional development conference or something where they can kind of get that hands-on, similar to what the SBA does with their conferences where they'll have their grantees come in and get some program management training type of stuff. So that's kind of the thought process that we're thinking is something to help them be better stewards of the funding that comes down. Because it's, you know, we want to help improve them. We're not like trying to kick people out, you know, kind of thing. So we're really just trying to help improve. So.
But I will also add on at an industry level, so not specifically supporting one organization or the other. There's been a lot of conversations, like so for example, at MIE, we have an impact management almost initiative that's built around these issues, like how do we help funders more efficiently provide TA and other resources regarding data management and collection. So it is a conversation that is happening. But you know, given like all the system barriers that I laid out and some of the things that you've heard, it's very difficult to figure out like comprehensive strategies across the board.
Right, great responses. Thank you all so much. So we did get one last question. So sorry, but we'll close it down after this. And I think this is a great way to conclude. But how do you build trust and buy-in with entrepreneurs / borrowers / business owners from whom we collect data? And I'm imagining this question is more directed toward us as CDFIs. And I can definitely kick off the response to this question, and then I'll pass it your way, Thelma. But for building trust and buy-in, you have to be there. You have to be present. You have to be in the communities. It's hard to build a relationship with someone who you've never heard of, who you don't know anybody within, who you don't see. And so we try to be extremely intentional about being the presence for supporting entrepreneurs, borrowers, business owners, and being that front-facing face that people know, respect, and come to for that support. That's how you build trust. You have to be there. You have to lead the programs. For example, a lot of the programs you've heard about on this call today, who do the business owners go to when they hear the press release about a big tranche of funds coming down? Who do they go to get more information? That's us as CDFIs. That's how we build that trust, because we're also sending out that information to them as well. Hey, did you hear about this? Hey, this is coming down. Hey, this is how you can be prepared. Hey, we're going to continue to keep you updated. So it's being there, it's being present, it's keeping people updated with what's going on, it's keeping them looped into the ecosystem. But that's one example of how we build trust and buy-in with our entrepreneurs, our borrowers, and our business owners. Thelma, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
That is exactly how we do it, and that's a relationship. Because that relationships move at the speed of trust, and if we don't have trust, then we won't have a relationship. And so by us creating a relationship, being there in the community, hearing from them, listening, allowing them to tell us what their needs are, and that we're building that trust, and that's how they continue to come back, because we have that relationship with them.
Thanks.
Brian, can I just maybe comment on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I just want to really acknowledge all of the CDFIs and nonprofits, because I think there was a test, the pandemic. And when everyone was shutting down, many of you kept your doors open. You worked with your local government to deploy grants. And so I think that was a real testament of the relationships and the value you add in communities. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's those opportunities that continue to cement those powerful relationships you have with your clients.
That
Thank
is
you for that.
absolutely true, because we called every borrower in our portfolio and when we were at home on March 15th and knew that we were going to be closed down for 2 weeks. And this is what we're going to do. And we're going to be here for you. And see, that relationship, like Brian said, we're there, we're in the community. That is how they began to trust, and the trust grows and grows, and that relationship grows. I thank you for those kind words. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wow. Oh, I hope y'all had some fun. I know we did. But thank you all so much for being a part of this panel discussion. Thelma, Azucena, James, Chris, it's been phenomenal. But with that, we are grateful to close out the panel discussion of our webinar today, and we will pass it back to Chantrice Barnes with Prosperity Now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again to our panelists and moderator Brian for such a wonderful and well-rounded conversation. In the conclusion of this webinar, I'm going to review the next steps in engagement. Next slide, please. We have a mentor coaching opportunity coming up, which will be led by our CDFI cohort on the 3 topics that we discussed in these webinar series, and that's financial management, TA and networks, and data management. To sign up, you must complete the registration questionnaire and the post-webinar survey. Folks that are interested must have attended all 3 Learn and Grow webinar series. From there, a follow-up application will be sent out between May 22nd to the 31st. And bookings for the coaching will open on June 1st, and they will be open only for that month. Reminder that this coaching session is only for an hour and a half. Next slide, please. If you missed our 2 previous sessions or were unable to attend, you can check these out at the Prosperity Now events page, and I will send it back to Lauda. Thank you all very much for attending.
Yes, thank you, Chantrice, and thank you to all our panelists. Some last minute steps. Visit our advocacy center to stay up to date with our advocacy efforts. Please complete the survey after this webinar ends, especially if you want coaching. Sign up for one of our networks to stay in the know, and let us know suggestions for future call topics. Plug into the Prosperity Now community. We have the Financial Security Network, the Affordable Housing Network, the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, and the Campaign for Every Kid's Future / Child Savings Account Network. Thank you everybody for coming and joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we're grateful to have been a part of it. Thank you. Have a great day.